The new year is just getting started, but now's the time to start thinking about races if you have goals to set new PRs in 2025. It sounds early to register in January for the spring or even the fall, but lots of popular races can fill up months in advance. Plus, signing up early will help to map out your training so you can peak at the right time for race day. That's why I brought on Coach Rory, and we're giving you our top picks for marathons to set a new personal best. Hills be damned, because the focus today is fast and flat courses that will help you shave off those extra few seconds or minutes. We'll get into the factors that make a marathon fast, and then chat through the best options within the US and internationally. There's too many great options out there to cover in a 1-hour podcast, but the races we mention are some of the best out there. So let's get into it. Rory, it's good to see you, man. As we're recording this, we're right at the end of the summer, just before New Year's, last recording of 2024. How are you feeling?
A little tired from, the holiday get-togethers and travels, hosting people, stuff like that. But overall, going to get energized and looking for a comeback in 2025. I know you might be in a different frame of mind coming off your big PR and recovering. So how about you?
Yeah, I mean, it was exciting to run a PR, and for those who haven't heard on other shows, I ran Valencia, which was December, so pretty recent for me. So feeling good on that, but yeah, just hoping to build on that and stay healthy, which I'd imagine is probably a goal for you as well in 25.
For sure. Hey, when you run that fast, I think it should just be in your tagline bio. You can start off every podcast with that if you want.
Just throw it out there on every podcast. Hey, I'm a 220x YouTuber, like all the, what do they do in like the reels where that's in the thumbnail?
Yep, you know it.
Well, I do love running fast marathons. I hope to run more, and that's kind of our theme today, is just finding the right races in 2025 or other years to PR. So you have a few in mind?
Love it. I could talk about it all day. Which ones do I have in mind? Let's see. Yeah, we'll definitely break all these races down, but just one I'll point out at the top because it's, being from Arizona. It was announced recently that it's back as the Marathon Project in Chandler, Arizona, which is basically like fast race course. It's a multi-loop race. I believe it was like 10K-ish loops, and they modify one of them. Anyway, it's been 5 years since they've had that race, and I got to attend in person and watch Sarah Hall win it in what was the second fastest marathon time for women at that during that year. So, yeah, really pancake flat course, and we can talk about what factors make a marathon fast, but that's one that's honestly intriguing me right in my backyard. Proximity is nice too. So, on my radar.
Rory, we've got to come back to that one, partially because, yeah, it's a super flat, fast marathon. They have a bajillion different pacers to help you get a PR, but the sheer cost of it is mind-boggling. What is it, like $500 US, 700?
Ooh, I think it's up there. Yeah, it's a few hundred for sure, closer to that. I don't know if there's some incentives or if they help out some of the athletes, but it's a lot.
Maybe we can get into a chat about which is more worth your money to PR, the Evo Pro Adidas Super Shoes, or getting into the Marathon Project where you have somebody pacing you.
Yeah, either way, you're going to end up dropping a lot of money, so.
True.
But for some people, it's worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. That PR feeling is hard to beat. So if you're craving that, before we get into more specific races, what should you even look for a race? How do you know if a race is fast or if it's suitable for your goals?
I don't know, I always go by this, but I would say if you hear one come up a lot, the people talking about it, hype, sometimes the hype is real. For the major ones that all come to mind, Chicago, Valencia, those ones, I mean, that's for a reason. But in terms of some factors, the number one thing, or the top two things I'm thinking about would be terrain and weather, which can tie into time of year, right? So for me, I lean towards the fall, winter marathons. I guess technically most of them would all be fall, depending when they fall in December. But a lot of the ones I like are in December, and then they're flat, but they have some undulation to the terrain, right? A pancake flat course, which I did mention that one in Chandler, that's happening. There can be some problems with that too, because if you have any weaknesses, you're just going to have that same repetition. And, I've had athletes and myself where I've just had, yeah, different aches and pains that hurt worse and cramping because you're not getting variation with the muscle groups that you're using.
Rory, this is how I know you live in a dramatically different climate from me, because until Valencia, I'd never run a marathon after October, let alone
Yeah,
mid-December.
that's true. Where I'm at and close to the desert, the race season is really picking up. It's hot right now. It's like November to February is a great time to race, especially in the Phoenix area, Southwest. So,
Yeah, I'll bet. Is it February or is it July when we often do our running retreats in Arizona?
and then we do the running retreat. Big differences in Flagstaff in July. So that's more of like a Denver climate since we're high up and going to be a lot cooler. Can still be hot in the sun, direct sun, but yeah, overall, I'd say if you're going lower elevation here, um, yeah, surprisingly, there's great race options in December, and then internationally too. You know, Obviously you did Valencia, so I don't know. Did you want to touch on those other factors? Like I mentioned, surface terrain. Are there any other factors that come to mind for you when picking a fast marathon?
I think there's a few. Just to finish off on surface terrain, are
Yes.
you meaning purely flat, or are there other things you want to consider there?
Yeah, definitely. The type of pavement can make a difference. Uh, Paris is pretty flat, right? But I know don't they have cobblestone sections and different kind of terrain like that. So that's something to keep in mind. I don't know too many of these really fast ones that have gravel mixed in, but I've heard of that, maybe those downhill revel races, which we could touch on as well. They start you up high and they have some gravel sections before you hit the pavement. So, but for the most part, I don't know. You don't want like beat up, run down roads, which I've experienced too.
Yeah, is there one that comes to mind with a lot of beat up roads?
Ooh, man, I don't want to put my hometown on blast. I think Fargo just had a couple, Fargo, North Dakota. It was more a result of flooding, which we can also touch on as well. This is actually a very flat, fast course, being in the Great Plains. Um, However, there's some issues due to flooding. This year, the course was changed, and it had somewhere in the ballpark of like 150 turns because we had to reroute. The river had covered up some main roads, and there's still some closures, so we had to kind of do a lot of cul-de-sacs and neighborhoods and just kill some miles in there and stay on this one part of town. And then also related to the flooding, and then also the harsh winters it creates. I'm sure you get that in Canada too. You get a lot of potholes, and the roads that look nice in the summer look beat up come spring after the winter. So there's just a few sections where in the super shoes, if you really want to go fast, like you got to watch yourself. You can roll an ankle, and I almost did in a couple spots. So
Yeah, I think that's something to consider if you're wearing high stack super shoes, especially, some of the more outlandish ones like the Prime X's. If there's a lot of hairpin turns, that's going to affect you.
and and then also there being in the Great Plains, one weather factor that I think about a lot is wind. Wind will really derail the race. Could be the fastest course, and if you have that wind switch directions, it's not at your back. I mean, I had that happen at Houston on the back part of the course. That's in January, very fast course, and as you got into the city, the wind was almost kind of funneled through the building. So it was really frustrating to see just 10 to 15 seconds added on to my mile pace, and I was just putting forth the same effort. I don't know if you've had that in some races.
Oh, yeah, I did one that actually ended up being okay this fall in Georgina, which is kind of cottage country just outside of Toronto.
Hmm.
But luckily it was an out and back, so at least you had the wind at your back for half of it. But we had gusts up to like 60 kilometers an hour, or sort of in the ballpark of like 35, 40 miles an hour. So certainly enough that you would really feel it.
Whew.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
there a point during that type of race where you just, if you're going for a PR, you kind of shift your mindset?
So it's funny you bring this up because this was a half marathon for me. So I think there was a point kind of 3 to 5 miles into the race where the gusts were really bad when I was kind of already shifting in that mindset of, I'm off pace. This is really tough. It's probably not a PR day, but just keep with it. You're fit enough to still run a good effort. That'll give you confidence. But I kept rolling with it. And after I got around that churn, it just felt so good with the tailwind at my back. And it wasn't a huge PR, but it ended up still being an okay day. So I think sometimes, be prepared for the weather. Don't be afraid to adjust your goals, but also, don't be afraid to push it a little.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm glad that one worked out. Do they have a full marathon there?
They do, yeah, and it actually caused some logistical challenges too, because they have a marathon that starts at the same time ordinarily, but they actually started it 5 minutes earlier this year. So you were
Okay.
kind of weaving around marathoners the first half if you were doing the half marathon.
Yeah, and this might be a case where I just point out to people when you're picking a race, I would always talk to someone who's done it and maybe done it in the last year or two. Maybe they did it 5 to 10 years ago and things change, they tweak the course, the start times. Those things can really make a difference if you're picking one solely to run a PR, BQ, or something else.
Yeah, other people you've talked to will have a good sense of the course and the weather and all the other factors that impact it. Also, I'll say when it comes to weather, I think people obsess a little in the days leading up to it. But one thing to check is even before you sign up, what's the historical weather? If you look at the past sort
Good
of
point.
2 to 4 race days, you can kind of get a sense of what it typically is and how much variation. And I always look for three things. One, what's the temperature? Two, how much wind are you going to see?
Hmm.
And three, how often is there precipitation? A little drizzle's not going to impact you, but if there's a downpour, that's going to be tough. And if you look at something like a Boston, you're going to see a ton of variation and you'll see some tough weather conditions going back over a few years. Whereas one of the reasons I picked Valencia is, it's a fast course, but also the weather's pretty consistent year over year. Like you're always getting that sort of 8 to 15 degrees, sunny, clear little wind, which is exactly what you want come race day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, you might hear about the one bad year that they ran it, but if that's not the trend, I wouldn't be too worried about that. But yeah, Valencia, and then I think CIM has the most consistent weather that I've seen when checking the trends.
Yeah. I should also say when I say 8 to 15, I'm talking Celsius. So more in the ballpark of, I
Yes,
guess, kind of 45 to 55 Fahrenheit.
got it.
Yeah.
We'll try to go back and forth with those numbers. I think I wrote kind of half and half with talking about meters as well. But
Yeah.
just so we knock out the remaining factors that we might be thinking about, do you want to just touch on, or both of us can do it? The other things that came to mind were logistics and then the race vibe, the crowds, competition, stuff like that.
Yeah. I think the other one that I wanted to bring up is sort of how many people you're likely to have running with you. So, like, if they have pace
There we go.
groups that's big, or just if you think there's going to be people running at your
Hmm.
pace. And that's often sometimes a trade off with the logistics piece because oftentimes a race close to you, you're not going to have time zone changes or travel. But if there's fewer people in the race, you might also not have as many people to run with or as many crowds cheering you on.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I kind of, it's harder to find, but I like those medium-sized marathons.
Yeah, I'm with you.
If you're going
Yeah,
for the super fast times.
I was gonna say one other factor that maybe people don't think of as much, uh, but the timing and logistics specific to your personal lifestyle. And what I mean by that is,
Oh, yes.
say you're somebody who works in retail, you probably don't want to do a race right around Black Friday because it's going to be crazy. So knowing that it's not close to weddings or major work periods is going to just take away a lot of the stress in your training.
Yeah, I totally get that. I had some athletes do the this one's gonna come up. The how do you say it? Kiwa? Is it the Kiwa? Kiwa
I
in South
I think
Carolina?
Coach Michael who did it pronounced it Kauai. Does that sound right?
Kauai?
Kiwa? I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I
Kauai.
shouldn't even try.
Then I'm thinking of Hawaii for some reason. Anyway, he's probably right. Kauai, because South Carolina, that marathon and half marathon. I just had a couple athletes. They ended up doing the half marathon. It just it wasn't a good time in the year. We did the best training we could, but it was just patchy and spotty with the holidays. One of the athletes was younger, finished coming off a cross country season actually, and then the other athlete was actually, they're both RC athletes. Her mom, and then her schedule is crazy, and just yeah, that timing of year was just not great. They didn't have the best days, but yeah, definitely something you want to try to plan out timing wise.
Yeah, 100%. And one thing to throw in before we get into specific names of marathons is how to pick out a marathon for you. I know oftentimes if I have ones in mind that I've heard from other people, I'll Google the races, but otherwise there's a great tool called Find My Marathon that I'll link in the show notes that sort of allows you to search by month and you can see how hilly it is and what the field size is. Are there any other tools you've used when you're trying to figure out what marathon to enter?
Yeah, that's one that's been really good. Just getting a course profile, elevation gain. It kind of ranks, how many people get a BQ or PR and whatnot. I like, if you're talking US, it's called runningintheusa.com. It might have the in there. I can't remember, but anyway, you can just break down all the races by state, filter for marathon, and it just has ones that might be a little bit under the radar but still worth looking into. And then if you're wondering about those, I would always like hop on, maybe some of the online forums like a Facebook group. Maybe you could find it on Reddit or something like that, but definitely a Facebook group. You could comment that local running club and just ask, hey, can you give me some information about this course? Is it like a fast one? What should I expect? And a lot of those people are more than happy to just give you their honest opinion about it.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's going to be a recurring theme is like the more people you can talk to who've done it, the better sense you're going to be how good a fit it is for you.
Hmm. And I guess you could do that in a Strava club too. They've changed their format more where they're becoming more like a social media site, can interact. You could send a DM to someone who you saw did that race too. It's a way to go.
Yeah, or some races will even have their own Strava groups. When I ran the
Yeah.
Copenhagen Marathon, they had a group just for runners doing that, and you could even find people selling their bibs through Strava and see all the
Oh
training
yes.
people are doing and what areas people like to run to in the city.
Hmm. Yeah, good point. I know some athletes who are resisting getting Strava, but I think there's definitely more pros than cons to it, in my opinion, if you can use it responsibly. So,
100%. Yeah. All right, let's kick off getting into our best marathons to PR, and I want to start. I'll say with the spring season, but I think really let's go with the first half of the year because I know there are some as early as January, February. So in the U.S., if you're looking for a marathon in the early part of the year, I know you prefer the fall winter season, but what are some of the marathons you'd recommend to somebody looking to PR?
all right, two big ones that I hear, bigger ones that come up. Obviously, Houston Marathon is in January. I've run it personally, so I have more insight on that course. I was really impressed with how pretty it is. More variation in scenery than I thought. It just kind of rolls really nicely. My only critique, which I hinted at, was like the headwind at the end, but typically the weather is like really nice and that the winds are less of a factor. Great competition for those people who may be in that sub elite category. You're going to have lots of people to run with, but then it's not, a lot of the pros may have raced those other, like New York City or Chicago. So you won't get like the top tier runners like really dragging the pace to just these crazy unattainable times. So I kind of like that if you're in the hunt for OTQ or something. I know that's like way up there. But then also, yeah, lots of depth for like running a BQ, and it doesn't feel as crowded, at least from what I've seen. You could be further back in the corral and disagree, but it doesn't seem like overwhelmingly massive. Um, and then another one would be I think now they just call it Mesa Marathon, but the Phoenix Mesa Marathon is in February, and it's kind of got a downhill marathon vibe, but it's not the straight up aggressive revel race type event. You just kind of start higher up and run into downtown Mesa ultimately. The courses can be a little bit boring, but I mean, just fast. It's got what you need. A little bit of variation. But yeah, you can run some fast times out there. Logistics, I will admit, have become a headache because people have caught on how fast it is. They might like the timing, and you have to like get a shuttle and get up ridiculously early for the time that you start. So I could speak to that one if people want to follow up with me, on social media or email or something. But those two come to mind for just the first part. And then I'll just name drop Louisiana Marathon is in January, and then the Jekyll Island Marathon in Georgia, also January.
Rory, I don't think you named a single marathon after February.
I know. I have a I have a lot here. I mean, March. What's coming to mind? I have in my notes the Shamrock Marathon. I think it's like Virginia Beach or something in March. Um, I can go later into the spring. How about you for those first few months? Anything come to
So if
mind?
you're talk yeah, if you're talking those first few months before you even get into April, May, which in my mind is kind of more peak marathoning season for those of us that don't live in a super warm
Yeah,
climate, I think Houston for sure, but that's probably like the weekend after this episode's coming out in mid-January.
that's
But
a
I guess
tough time
yeah,
to peak with your training.
yeah, the Disney Marathon I think is January or
Oh,
February. That's a
yes.
popular one, but it sells out crazy early. One that I've personally done is the Woodlands Marathon, which is in March. It's sort of a medium-sized race, maybe a few
Hmm.
thousand people just outside of Houston, but it's two loops, so it's not too many, and it's very flat, very fast. It's well organized, and lots of decent sub-elite to borderline elite runners if you want people to run with on the faster end too. Um, and then it's not really a fast course. But obviously, you have LA in March as well, which is just a big city marathon where you're definitely going to
Yes.
have lots of crowds, lots of people cheering you on. And I think they have shuttle service as well to the start lines.
Nice. Yeah. The Woodlands for sure. I've heard about that. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on a loop race where you're maybe doing two or three loops
So I
repeating?
don't think I don't think I mind two loops. I think once you get above two to three, it starts to get a little bit redundant. I'll admit when I did the Woodlands due to injury, I actually had to step down to the half marathon, so I only did one loop. But I think it would have been fine doing two. When I ran Georgina, I've done both the half marathon and the full marathon there, so the full just being the same out and back twice, and I don't think I minded it too much, and that's even though the course is pretty much the same scenery the entire way.
Nice. I'm a fan of it. I think in a time situation, if you're going for full on experience and scenery, obviously you're going to see the same thing twice. Not as ideal, but if you want to get tactical, lock in, know where your stuff is at, know exactly what to expect on the course. Um, yeah, mentally, I think you can get kind of in this zone, and it helps you break up the race incrementally, which can be beneficial.
Yeah, I think it's also super helpful if you haven't run the course before to kind of know as you're finishing how far out you are. I've had so many races when maybe you see that last mile, but it feels very different on your finishing kick being like a mile out versus say 500 meters, and you have a much better sense where you're at if you're
Oh,
doing a
yeah,
looped course.
totally. Yeah, that would be another factor, like you mentioned with marathons close to home. If you know the course and have just run on it, yeah, more than once, that helps so much mentally.
Yeah, I think one piece of advice I'd give people if you're talking to somebody who's run the race, ask them for landmarks. Like if you know something to look for to show you're near halfway or to show that you have 400 meters to go and are ready to start kicking, it's going to help to ground yourself.
Hmm.
No. All right, so
Right
I
on.
think those are some very early in the year. Let's talk maybe more kind of traditional spring marathon, so like April to June or maybe even July. Are there any marathons that you've run that you really enjoy?
Let's see. I've referenced Fargo Marathon, which is in mid to late May, and non or floods permitting or cooperating. Hopefully there's not flooding. And if they have a normal course, I think it can be pretty fast. There can be a risk of it sort of, if it's later in May, getting a little bit humid, which is can be a similar problem at another super fast one, which is Grandma's Marathon, which I have done a few times. I've run the full twice. It was my first marathon ever, and then I ran it in 2023, trying to run an OTQ time, and yeah, that has kind of a generally a downhill grade, point to point, and now it can go really well for some people. I had a bad day, which may have soured my opinion on it, but it just happened to be humid there. Midwest weather is a little bit variable, but if you have a good weather day, I've seen some monster PRs there, and yeah, generally it's going to be better than worse, but it's a gamble, and that might be another one where I note logistics in Duluth, Minnesota. It's just really hard to get a hotel near the course, and it gets expensive. Yeah, just with housing and trying to figure out your ride to the shuttles or to the start line. So, but I do love that. If you can get into it, apply early enough, that's up there.
Is this for the Fargo marathon you're talking about?
I kind of switched from Fargo to Grandma's
To
Marathon
Grandma's.
in Duluth.
Okay.
Yes,
And that's in June, right?
that's in June.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I've heard that's a very fast course.
hmm There is Mountains to Beach Marathon, which has kind of a downhill grade in April. Lots of people like to do that for a BQ, but I've also heard mixed reviews on how fast that is. Maybe it's a little harder than advertised, and but I don't know. Do you have anything in that time range? Maybe April, May, June.
So I don't think I've personally yet raced a U.S. marathon in that time range, in part because it's good weather here that time of year, so you don't need to look around as much. But one that I might actually end up doing in 2025 is the Glass City Marathon, which is April in Toledo, Ohio. So that's kind of, an easy 7-8 hour drive-ish for me from Toronto. And if you're living anywhere in the Northeast, it's probably relatively easy to road trip. The other more major one I think is worth mentioning is the Eugene Marathon.
Oh,
I'm not
yes.
sure if that one's April or May, but that's a more big city marathon that's known to be flat and fast.
Yes. Yeah, that one is in April, I believe.
April. Okay. Okay. Yeah. And is it relatively easy to sign up for? Like, can you still sign up in January?
Yeah, that one I don't think is as like in demand. I think you could still get in later than like definitely Grandma's Marathon. Yeah, you're not going to get in January. So,
All right. And I think one we have to mention before I go to international races is Boston.
yes,
Not a
yes.
flat course, but a lot of fast runners. What are your thoughts on Boston as a PR attempt?
You can PR there if the stars align. I mean, you got Ryan Hall, who does he still have the fastest, not official American record, but fastest marathon time run by an American on that course. There was like a unique tailwind that year. Sometimes the weather can cooperate, and then if you can really hold back, which is talked about to exhaustion, hold back in that first half, there is a chance where you can power through those hills and end up with a good time. So, and I mean, yeah, definitely got to mention it because for a lot of runners, we're talking about this because they're running these races to get into Boston if they haven't run it before.
Yeah, I think to me, Boston, a good mindset is to think of it as a victory lap because you just don't know what you're going
Yeah.
to get. But as you said, if the stars align, if you get that tailwind and you don't get crazy wind or rain or hot temps, then yeah, it is a net downhill.
hmm Yeah, but definitely a race to go into. There's just some races you got to run it as an experience, and that's a good one. I like that victory lap.
And that's a pretty cool experience at that.
Exactly.
All right, before moving to the fall, let's talk about some international races. If you're willing to venture outside of the U.S., have you done any spring marathons outside of the country?
Spring marathons, not like well-known ones or fast ones. I've run a marathon in Fiji.
Cool.
Was it in the spring? Yeah. So,
What brought you
um,
to Fiji?
I've referenced it a little bit. I work with a travel company, so I lead some student trips to different countries around the world, and I'll usually line up a race. So I won't waste people's time with that, but I definitely think there's something to be said for doing those quirky, off the grid marathons. If you're a new place, sign up for it. So we'll stay disciplined and go with fast ones. I haven't run too many in that time frame internationally, but the ones that do come to mind, I'm sure you might have them, would be Rotterdam in April. It's got like 70 meters of elevation gain going back to the marathon project. Ben Rosario puts that one on
Yeah,
here in
that's less than
Arizona.
Berlin.
What?
I think that's less elevation game than Berlin,
It's
so that's
less
pretty flat.
elevation gain than Berlin. And Ben Rosario, is he, yeah, NAZ, former NAZ elite coach? No, he's still with NAZ elite. Um, he's called that one like the perfect lab created race, the
It was going to
Rotterdam.
be Kelvin Kiptum's sub 2 hour attempt.
Yeah, that's where Kiptum was going for the sub 2 hours. Um, and then Paris is in that same time frame, right? Also pretty quick in April, rolling hills, um, good weather. That one's like 450 feet elevation gain. It's not to be confused with the Olympics course that they did, the Summer Olympics
Which was
marathon course,
not flat.
which was not flat. Yeah, what about what else? Other ones are you thinking of?
Well, we can't not mention London and Tokyo, right?
Oh, London and Tokyo. Yeah, yeah.
Like
Well, those
those,
are just
yeah,
so. I mean, they're just yeah, world majors. So definitely.
they're they're iconic, and you pretty much your only ways into to London unless you live in the UK are either by lottery or by charity. So, um, you're certainly not guaranteed to get in, but from what I've heard, a cool experience if you can.
If you could do only one of those, which would you choose?
That is a tough question. I actually considered whether I should try and put on my radar Tokyo for 2026, but I'll be traveling to Tokyo not to run, but to watch some of the track world championships in 25. So I don't know if I can justify 2 trips out to Japan in such a close
Hmm.
time frame. But I think just as an experience, if I put aside other trips that I have planned, it might have to be Tokyo because it's just in my mind anyways likely to be such a different experience from any race you're gonna get back home.
Yeah, totally. And that can give you energy and excitement. I agree. I might go with that one just for the novelty. I just like when you're a little bit out of your comfort zone with the different language and just things being kind of foreign. And honestly, it can relate to logistics, time zones, just from my experience. If you're gonna like switch time zones, the Europe time zone for me is a little bit harder because it's just an awkward amount of time, 5 to 7 hours difference, versus if you're just going like 12 to 14 hours. I don't know. I can just roll in more tired and fall asleep easier and lock into it a little bit quicker from what I've experienced.
Yeah, I should give one caveat though that if I were going for a PR, I might choose London just for the familiarity. Like if I'm going
Yeah.
for the experience, for me it's Tokyo, but oftentimes in those 2 to 3 days before the race, I want familiar food. I want to feel like I'm sleeping somewhere close to home, which is the opposite of what I normally want traveling. But leading up to race day, there's just a certain
Mm.
comfort in it.
Yeah, that's a good point. And maybe that course is just a little bit more tailor made for fast
Yeah,
time, the design.
yeah,
Hmm.
I agree. If you're not looking for a major though, I mentioned Copenhagen earlier. Fantastic course.
Mm-hmm.
Like the fans there are great. I met up with a local running club before, and they were so welcoming, super nice people. Everyone speaks English in Denmark, and it's a very flat, fast course, so it's a great opportunity for a PR.
What time of year or what month is that in?
This is early May.
Early May.
Yeah, I think that one typically fills up somewhat early, so it might be
Mm-hmm.
sold out already for 2025 as this airs, but If that's something you'd be interested in running, definitely look out for it after the race to sign up for 2026.
I have heard good things and seen some fast times from some locals here. So, uh, when is Toronto Waterfront?
So that's a good bridge to the fall because that one happens in October.
Oh, okay.
But it's a
Good.
beautiful course. It goes all the way along the lake shore here, and you see lots of different parts of the city, and
Sure.
it's super flat, super fast, and I believe it's a gold label race as well.
Hmm. Yeah, don't hesitate to throw in more Canadian marathons. So,
Yeah, so I mean, Toronto Waterfront is fantastic. Not to be confused with the Toronto Good Life Marathon in May, which is a fast course, but maybe not as big and maybe not um, quite as well run as the October one. I ran the Montreal Marathon this year, and it's not super flat, but it's just a couple big hills, and it's pretty well run. Um, and then I've heard good things about the Vancouver Marathon in May. It's not pancake flat, but it's got good weather, especially if you
mhm.
like cooler temps, kind of more in the you know 40, maybe low to mid 40s, and not so hilly that you're going to be way off a PR if you're in shape for it.
Right on. Appreciate that insight.
Yeah, I love throwing in some Canadian races. So if anyone hasn't traveled to Canada for a race, definitely come on down.
I'm game for it. So, yeah, if you want to, switch to that second half of the year, fall, winter, I can. You want to start in the U.S. maybe?
Yeah, let's do it.
And again, I think we'll definitely talk about the big name ones and give our 2 cents on that. I'll kind of give just a brief list of some ones that maybe don't jump into people's minds right away. I just have a few jotted down. There's the Mohawk Hudson Valley Marathon. I think that's more upstate New York. That's October.
How many people is
Also,
that? This is out of left field.
I know. Hey, I have a source, okay? I have a good source where he just knows so many fast marathons and has a big athlete roster. He's coached me before too. I have my intel.
You do
Uh,
have good intel, I guess.
yeah, Coach Dylan Bellis.
Okay, he's got the insider info on all these unknown marathons, huh?
Yeah, and originally, well, he has some East Coast ties as well. And another one I've also heard in New York, this is in Corning, New York, is the Wine Glass Marathon. It's like 125 meters or so of gain, 400 feet of elevation gain. It has a nice downhill um, grade for the most part with a little undulation. And I've seen some RC athletes do that and perform really well. So that one comes to mind. We've already said California International Marathon. We say CIM for short. That's in December. That's one of my top choices. And the one in South Carolina that I mispronounced, Kauai. Two loops. That's a loop marathon. So I believe you run that marathon, half marathon course twice, which I personally, like we discussed earlier, I like. And it's coming in at a whopping 39 meters of elevation gain, 120 feet.
Wow, that is pancake flat.
Could be one of those ones where it gets a little scary flat. Like you might want to mix in some surges as you grab a cup of water, and your legs could feel a little stale on that type of course. Just a heads up.
All right, and by the way, just as you were listing out some details, I was looking up how do you actually pronounce it because honestly, I'm not personally sure, and I'm not sure how much I can completely pronounce or trust this website how to pronounce. But going off a quick Google search, it's saying Kiowa, so I think you were closer.
Okay. Yeah, Kauai was. Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah,
Kiowa.
yeah. I have a couple friends who are going and doing the Wine Glass marathon, and I've heard it's flat and fast as well.
Yeah, because that wouldn't be a terribly far journey from Canada.
Yeah, exactly. I think for them, they were looking for something fast that wasn't Canada, but that also didn't require a flight and somewhere too
Hmm.
far.
And I think they have some other counterparts because you got wine country on the West Coast in Northern California, and there's another one. Is it Lake Sonoma? Probably. I've heard that one's fast, but that might be earlier in the year. So not to
Yeah.
be confused with that.
Yeah, I before just one more that's not really fall, and I know this isn't the U.S., but I've heard the Gold Coast Marathon, which is in July, is really
Mm,
fast if you're willing to venture all the way out to Australia. So, uh,
true.
thought I would
And
shout
it's a
out
little
that
bit
one.
cooler then, right?
Yeah, because
For
that's
them.
that's for them their winter time.
Hmm.
Yeah. As far as U.S. fall marathons go, though, a couple that I don't think you mentioned that I've heard talked about a lot. One, I know a lot of people come September that go to the Erie Marathon just because it's the last weekend to submit a BQ time. So if you're looking for a fast course that's kind of in the Northeast United States, that aligns with that timeline, it works really, really well. I think also there's in November, the Indy Marathon is a very fast one in the same
Indy
area.
Monumental, correct?
That's right. Yeah. And then my coach, not her PR anymore, but at one part had ran her PR in the Philly Marathon. So I think
Mm,
it's maybe not quite as flat as a couple of the others we've named, but definitely one where you can run really fast. That's certainly not hilly like a Boston
true.
or anything like that.
Yeah, glad you mentioned Philly. I've had a personal coaching athlete with Runners Connect who ran a PR out there. Can be a little chilly, but seemed like a fast course. And then while we're kind of in that time frame to Columbus, Ohio, could put that on your radar. Maybe kind of a nice sized race where it's definitely not monster crowds, but big enough we're going to have people to run with if you want to run fast. And yeah, just good weather generally.
What do you think of something like a tunnel marathon that's very flat, but I believe that one is on like some buffed out trails. Is that right?
Hmm. Yeah, it's more like gravel road type thing.
Yeah, I think so.
Um, yeah, I'd say if you're, it depends. Like for just getting a BQ, I think it could be a good one if you're trying to run. If we've kind of referenced a sub elite OTQ type range. I don't think anyone's doing that there, but yeah, it could be something to try out, especially if you have a chance to train on like rail trail. But I would just be aware of get comfortable like with doing workouts and feeling what those paces feel like. If you're really used to road marathons, it's kind of a trip, and then footwear might be something to consider. I think it's still very runnable, but yeah, I wouldn't rule it out.
Okay. And then one more US one that we already mentioned, so I feel like we kind of have to come back to it, is the Marathon Project. And this obviously didn't happen in 2024. It was held in 2020 when COVID first started, and now coming back in 25 as an inaugural race. I believe this will be mid to late December, and the entry fee is just completely absurd. So, from what you've heard, like, is it flat and fast enough that you would justify that cost if you're looking for a PR?
I'd say potentially yes, but this is pretty exclusive. I think they're just adding like a sub elite field. For the most part, they want women to be under 230, men to be under 220, and they down the road they might kind of expand the field, but they're keeping it like yeah, very very quick time. So I think to some of those athletes, it is worth it because you need to be really selective. You can do some of these big races and still end up by yourself, which is hard to run a fast time. And there's maybe three or four people around you, or they're just too far ahead and you're kind of stuck in this island where we've been at, with our times, maybe sub 230, which I know can sound crazy fast and elitist to some people, but that's a consideration, and that's what this race is designed to be. So in this case, I personally know the runners who are going to be there. It's going to be really meticulous. methodical planning. You're just going to have crowds of people maybe blocking wind for you and well put together. So the price tag would be worth it if you want that lifetime PR or a shot at the Olympic trials.
Yeah, and just looking at details now, so it's 520 US, but that cost is not for elite. So the times you listed for like a sub 220, you get a discounted entry. They have what they're calling a gold wave, so sort of the equivalent of like a sub elite entry. So it looks like here, don't quote me on this, but it seems like the entry is either a 245 for men
Okay.
or 310 for women, which not OTQ level, but obviously still quite quick.
Yes, yes. No, thanks for looking at that. I didn't quite have a chance to look at all the details of the new rollout, but yeah, definitely at least yeah, worth poking around and looking at that info.
Yeah, yeah, I think probably the only race in the U.S. we'll name that might actually be pricier to run than going to an international race or another major.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, I was just in that area. I don't know. You can get some plenty of hotels in the area. I don't think you get too priced out there.
All right.
Whereas some of the international races, I'm sure it gets really pricey to find a place to stay, like in Paris. That's going to be comfortable in what you need and not a hostel.
Yeah, if you're in the States, I think one of the most expensive fall races to run is probably the new major, which would be Sydney, because I'd imagine the flight prices are definitely up there.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and that one's, I don't even think it's a flat course. I think that's pretty hilly, so maybe an experience, but not one for a PR.
Yeah, I had one athlete do that, and yeah, that was my impression. Not super speedy, but can meet the other criteria for being kind of special, unique race.
Yeah. All right,
Um,
maybe let's name a few that are speedy international races in the winter. I might just list a few I have here, and we'll see if there's any gaps there. Others you want to mention? I'll start with the majors. So I mentioned Sydney, but obviously Berlin is one that is quite quick
mhm.
and in the fall. Or I don't even think we mentioned Chicago, which is obviously in the States and super fast. New York being a major as well, but super hilly. Um, I said Toronto Waterfront is in October. Great race if you want to come to Canada. Not international for me. The Amsterdam Marathon in October.
Ah,
I
yes.
ran that and unfortunately had to pull out, but the half of it that I actually ran was an amazing time and quite fast. And then obviously I have to say Valencia right at the beginning of December. It's great weather, great vibe, and just so many talented runners. I will say if you are a sub maybe 3 hour marathoner for men or sub 320 for women, you will not have as many people running with you as you did at that race. Um, I think even when I ran Boston, I felt totally alone compared to just how many people were running near me at Valencia. So definitely shout out to that race.
Incredible. I mean, I think that could be a good way to wrap things up because you hit everything on my list. But at the same time, I feel like we're probably blanking on some races. Once you like actually prep for this, it's like it's almost exhausting with the list. So
Yeah.
if you want to chime in and comment or send us a message and be like, "How'd you forget this one?" or "This one's in my area," definitely let us know about those because I'm sure we just kind of blanked. Um, but yeah, I just wanted to maybe say the my top two ones and then ask you, you know, now that you're recovering coming off your PR, would you like repeat some of the races you've done or like pick a new lineup? And to just cut to the chase, I think the two ones that are top of my list would be Chicago coming up. I don't know if it'll be in 2025, but I definitely want to race that. I would be more hesitant with, you know, climate change could be a factor. There's been some years where it's hotter, and heat is something that really dissuades me. I just want those cool, crisp temps. So if I had to pick my top choice, and based on what you've told me, I think Valencia is going to be number one. So uh, maybe a 20, based on my recovery, which I've referenced from Hagelin's deformity removal surgery. I could see that one being on my uh, racing list in 2026.
Yeah, yeah. And when you say top two, are you thinking like if you had two races to pick to go run
Yeah.
a PR, which would they be?
Yes, just my top two that I know I need to do for hitting my PR. Hmm.
Yeah. So I'll start by egging you on to do Chicago because I'm doing that in 2025 and would love
Okay.
to meet up and see more fast runners running that one. So hopefully it lives up to the hype. From what I've heard, I'm sure it will. Um, it's hard to pick out because there's so many good options out there. But I think I have to put Berlin on my list among those that I haven't run because it's just so iconic and one of the most consistent races you're going to do weather wise. But I'm also torn because even though I've done Valencia, I definitely want to go back to that race because it is just such a cool experience. So I don't think I've run my last Valencia.
Nice. Yeah,
Yeah.
good answer.
Yeah, I'm just excited to race after all this. I don't know about you, but I'm excited to just kind of start my training build as we're getting into 2025.
Oh yeah. Anytime you talk about these events, it's like, man, I should do that one and this one. So I guess to wrap up, I might say if you are, and if you want to add on to this, thinking of maybe you haven't nailed down your calendar and you're trying to pick some events to really get that PRBQ, I would say typically, I think you have two really good targets each year where you can just run all out, swing for the fences. Maybe you can sneak a third in there as a training run or experience marathon. But I would pick one from the list if it fits in with your schedule in the spring and then one in the fall, winter.
Yeah, I think I found that works well. And sometimes I've done 3 marathons and used one as kind of a workout to just kind
Yes.
of get in the 26 miles. But yeah, I think definitely if you want to give it an all out effort and go for a PR, I think doing one in the spring and one in the fall makes a lot of sense. And maybe just one quick question before we wrap up. But you mentioned a lot of races in January, February. That's obviously not
Oh,
kind of
that's true. Yeah.
traditional seasons. So do you think you can fit in a third if you do it earlier? Would you still hold off and maybe just do one earlier in the fall?
Oh, that's a good point. That one might be my West Coast Southwest bias with weather here. So, um, yeah, sometimes I like that earlier marathon of the year to be a little less pressure. Like you still run it hard, but you kind of see what you can do, and then you know where to build off from the fall. So, to answer that, if it fits in with my life schedule, I like some of those races I mentioned. I might try to run that one pretty hard, knowing it might not be as good as my fall marathon. And then since I raced in January, February, I know I can definitely race a potentially an April marathon, May marathon, and I might even be able to race something like Grandma's pretty hard in June. So I could have in that case three targets where I go all out.
I was just gonna say grandma's in June is probably makes a lot more sense for timing if you're doing one in Jan Feb than a lot of the other
Yeah.
races we mentioned.
So for those who like a more aggressive schedule, you can do it. But even when I've raced three, I feel like only one or two of them are went really well. There's going to be just one off day.
It's also just really hard I found in my build to Valencia being in December, which is also kind of off timing, being in peak training when nobody else is and feeling like your race is far away when everybody's getting ready to run. It does take you out of that marathon excitement a little, but maybe that kind of depends what city you're in and what races people are signing up for.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, end of the day, definitely have one on your calendar that gets you excited and amped, and that's going to really help improve training.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to wrap up. I'm still trying to finalize for the spring, but I'm amped up about Chicago and whatever else I end up running. So, Roy, best of luck to you with your running and everyone listening. I hope you guys have an awesome time running in 2025.
Right on. Thanks, guys. Best of luck.
Thanks, Roy.